Hi, welcome back to GCSE recap videos for religion and life. This is a new topic which we have yet to cover. We have videos that look at the beliefs, we have videos that look at practices, we will have at some point videos that look at peace and conflict, and this is the start of the videos looking at religion and life. This will be a very short, I say that every video, but who knows, this one might actually be short. That looks at evaluating how religious people view life and its importance. Just a very brief introduction to the topic so that we have a good, sound understanding of some of the attitudes that religious people might have and what those beliefs are grounded in, where they come from. The first thing I actually have to think about is why may Christians and Muslims think human life is important? Now, the idea that human life is important is somewhat universal amongst religions, especially the Abrahamic faiths anyway. You may find slightly different attitudes in sort of Eastern religions, which focus more on reincarnation and the sort of cycle of rebirth. However, in the monotheistic Abrahamic faiths of Islam, Christianity and Judaism, there is quite a lot of importance placed on the individual human life. So why do we think this is then? The main reason is that they all, to some extent, to some variations, have a belief in the idea of the sanctity of life, which is something we'll have a look at in a second. We'll look at our keywords. It also boils down to the idea that they believe that, or Christians, Muslims and Jews, all believe that we were created by God personally. God is an individual, a person within Christianity, Islam and Judaism. He is not just a deistic God who creates the universe and then is not involved in it. He is active in the world. He is immanent. He impacts the world. He gets involved with his creations. If we look at Christianity specifically, we were made in God's image, and we are the reason, if you believe in the idea of dominion, the reason that the universe exists is for us to exist, to worship God, and to access heaven. So, life is incredibly important to all three of these religions. We're going to have a look at them, look at some of the reasons why, mainly with Christianity and Islam. I do apologise, but they're the two religions that my students are looking at. So if you're looking for information about Judaism, I'm afraid this is not the place today. We will be focusing mainly on Islam and Christianity. So then, today's keywords. We have sanctity of life. Now, this is something that is incredibly important that we understand. It impacts a lot of the topics we look at. It's going to have an impact on discussions about abortion, euthanasia, contraception. It's going to have impact on when we talk about violence, we talk about war, we talk about punishment, we talk about capital punishment. It really is important. I know I say this is really important a lot, but this is a particularly foundational Christian belief, I would suggest. So the main idea of sanctity of life is that all life is holy as it is created and loved by God. Christians believe that life is a gift from God, a sacred gift from God, and as such it should be protected and it should be preserved wherever possible. Human life should not be misused or abused. So the idea of the sanctity of life is that life is a gift, it is important, it needs preserving, it needs protecting, and it needs respecting. Not only is it important because it might have value to the individual, but it also has a value to God. It is sacred. And it also is a gift as well. I use the word value there. When we're talking about value, it's not necessarily monetary value. It means the regard in which something is held. Or the importance, the worth or usefulness of something. Very often when we look at arguments about, we will be looking later at arguments about euthanasia and abortion, very often quality of life is measured against the value of life, or in this context, the quality of life is measured against the sanctity of life. So we need to understand religious attitudes about why life has value. One aspect of it is the sanctity of life, but there are other aspects as well, which we will drill down into when we get to that. And pro-life is another key term that we're looking at, not necessarily specifically today, but we will be looking at going forward. Pro-life is very often contrasted with pro-choice, and they are two very distinct attitudes and opinions towards whether or not abortion, and in some contexts euthanasia, but mainly abortion, should be allowed. Pro-life opposing abortion and euthanasia, and pro-choice normally only abortion. It supports the woman's right to choose, but you could also extend that to euthanasia, although it is not as commonly done. So these are your three key words. They're not necessarily specific to today, but they are incredibly useful, and will be necessary that you understand these in order to understand the religion in life topic. So if you were lucky enough to be one of my students when we sat and did this lesson together, I would have asked you to have written down your ideas as to what makes human life valuable. Now, you can still do this now, I don't expect you to write it down, obviously this is a revision video, but just have a think about what things make human life valuable. Why do we value human life? Obviously a Christian would say that we value human life because we are made in our Creator's image, we are made in the image of God, and that God has given us a gift of life, and as such we should not waste it. However, this is not to say that people who aren't Christian don't value life. Obviously other religions do as well, but you could look at it from a secular perspective. In contemporary Britain, I for example value my life, even though I'm not a believer myself. There are things that give my life value. I've recently discovered that I'm going to be a father, which is excellent, and that gives my life value. I live with my partner, I love them very much, and that gives my life value. I love my parents, I love my job, and hopefully I'm contributing to the education of further subsequent generations, which all for me gives value to my life. Now, I don't have any value from a spiritual or religious context, but that does not mean that others don't. Christians specifically will focus on, would view that life being important because it is sacred, because it is holy, it's a gift from God, but they would also seek or see value in the other bits of life, as I described for myself. I asked you to have a think about this because when we are evaluating whether or not some things should be allowed, such as abortion, such as euthanasia, such as death penalty later when we get into the next topic of crime and punishment, we need to be able to make a value judgment on a life. Then the next thing I would have asked you to have done would have been to consider when life might not be sacred. Think of some examples in situations where you may think that it is acceptable to end a human's life. I think, as a general rule, most of us would accept that ending someone's life, killing someone, is generally a bad thing. However, there might be some specific circumstances where people might think that it is acceptable. For example, I don't personally, but some people might think that the death penalty for certain crimes is acceptable. Very often things like murder, rape, paedophilia, they seem to be the ones that people might think that death penalty is acceptable for. I say I don't share their belief. However, that is, it's their opinion. They're perfectly entitled to hold that opinion. There are other examples. For example, some people might think that euthanasia, or the deliberate ending of a life for a person who is suffering, could be the most compassionate option. Abortion, whether or not you agree that life begins at conception, there is something there that is being terminated, and a life that is being denied the possibility of living. So for some people, that is a price that they're not willing to pay, and for others, they might see that it might be the lesser of two evils, or might be something that they think is a positive. You may consider ideas of police officers and soldiers who are employed by less police officers, but soldiers at least are employed by their nation to, shoot stuff and break things. Amongst other stuff, obviously they do a lot of other tasks as well. But if a soldier kills a enemy combatant in the line of duty, we don't necessarily consider that person to be a murderer, or some people may not consider that man or woman to be a murderer. These exceptions are things that we're going to have to bear in mind and you're going to need to be aware of, because if you are asked to evaluate whether or not abortion should be permitted, should be allowed, you need to be able to come up with an argument that might go against what you believe. This is a particularly interesting part of the RE topics, because you may be asked to evaluate whether or not abortion should be acceptable, and you may have quite a strong view on abortion. You need to make sure that you're able to understand the counter arguments. For example, myself, I'm quite pro-choice. However, in order to be able to effectively evaluate, I need to understand pro-life arguments, and I need to understand where it comes from and why people feel so strongly about these things. The next thing we're going to have a look at is a little bit of a thought experiment, actually, which puts into context ideas about whether or not all human life is of the same value, and what the difference is between, sort of, say, deliberately killing somebody or allowing somebody to be killed. You may have heard of it. It's called the trolley problem, which we'll have a look at now. So here's just a little thought experiment to get you thinking about the idea of the value of life and whether or not all lives are worth the same. Now, you may have come across it before. I'm not going to ask you to write anything down for this. It's just a thought experiment to get you thinking. It's called the trolley problem. And I'd like you to imagine that you are the person in the middle there, next to the switch. There's a train coming along the tracks, heading towards these 5 people who are tied to the tracks. You don't know who they are, you don't know anything about these people. You can pull that switch, which will move the train onto the second track below it, where you can see there's only one person tied up there. Do you pull the switch? Do you pull the switch and kill that one person to save these 5 people? Now, there is no answer to this question. It's personal opinion. I personally would pull the switch, going from an argument of, one person is fewer than 5. However, other people disagree. This problem can be used, though, for you to assess ideas about how we value human life. Now, if you start to change who the people are, the 5 people could be criminals, then, people may be less inclined to pull the switch. Or if you say that the one person is a loved one, a close relative, you may not be so ruthless or straightforward with it. As I said, there's no answer. I'd just like you to ponder this, and then, of course, we can use this. We will be able to refer back to this when we're looking at ideas of whether or not life is valuable and whether or not all life is valuable. So hopefully these keywords will be useful for us going forward, looking at our new topic. And that should be it for today. Again, very, very brief, just an introduction to the new topic and just get us thinking about a couple of things. I will attach a video to a better explanation of the trolley problem in order for you to see it explained by someone who's not me. It's always good to have a fresh voice. The next slide I will put up will be a 12-mark question, which I would recommend that you have a look at if you are studying AQA RE. However, obviously this is a revision video, so if you are one of my students, you may already have done it. However, it doesn't hurt to revisit a previous question. So, as with all topics, we've got some very, very important keywords. Now, you need to know all of these keywords going forward, so I really would recommend you write them down. Not only writing down my definition, but also creating your own definition in your own words so that you know what these words are. Number 1 is euthanasia, which is the termination or ending of a very sick person's life in order to relieve them of suffering. Very often it's elderly or very sick or disabled people who may wish to undergo euthanasia, wish to end their lives, given that their quality of life is so low that they would prefer to end their suffering. Sanctity, so this refers to sanctity of life, which is the quality or state of being holy, sacred or saintly. So when we're talking about sanctity of life, we're talking about the fact that life is a gift from God. God created us in the eyes of many religious peoples, therefore it should be respected. Abortion, which is deliberate termination of a human pregnancy. So it's not a miscarriage, it's deliberately ending a pregnancy before the birth. Now there's 2 definitions here, dominion and stewardship. Now these are sort of
contrasting and conflicting beliefs. They're both Christian beliefs. So dominion is the Christian belief that God's grace gave them the power to rule over the world. So God gave humans the power to rule over the world, have dominion over it, and to do as they see fit with it. Stewardship is the Christian belief that God has given the humans the responsibility of looking after the planet. Now, they are slightly different and they do sort of oppose slightly. However, they are two Christian views. Some Christians believe that in dominion, some Christians believe in stewardship.
If you are going to have a go at the exam question, I would suggest that you time yourself and spend no more than 15 minutes on it. As a general rule in your exam, you will be allocated about a minute, or you should be allocating yourself about a minute a mark in order to make sure that you are using your time most effectively. So, all life is sacred. Evaluate this statement. You need to make sure that you are referring to Christian teachings and giving developed arguments in support of this statement. You need to give developed arguments to support a different point of view, and then you need to reach a justified conclusion. Please do not give me your opinion until you are concluding. Unfortunately, as much as I am interested in it, the examiner is not. Or the examiner may well be interested in it, but unfortunately it doesn't get you any marks. So try and restrain your enthusiasm and only give me your own opinion in your justified conclusion and make sure you are specifically referencing back to the arguments you've previously made. You need to make sure that you show the understanding of the key words. You need to show that you understand what sacred means. So I would suggest you start with a definition of that immediately, just so that you can demonstrate that you understand what the word means. Well, hopefully that sets us up nicely for the start of a new topic. As always, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to pop one down in the comments section below, or email me directly, or of course pop in and see me in class.